I remember being 10 years old and seeing my first like circus show. And I remember thinking to myself, you know, I was a gymnast at the time, but I was really unhappy with where my gymnastics was going and what it was doing. And I remember thinking, God, I want to do that. I want to go on stage and do these crazy things. And I remember being 12 and seeing sort of an acrobatic circus gymnastics show and feeling the same feeling of, God, I want to do that. There were companies of people who did jump rope and some other fun little ground circus stuff, and I think there was an aerialist. I don't remember. And so we fast forward a couple of years, you know, I go to middle school, I become a really big weeaboo, I get really into Homestuck, I'm a gymnast, I compete for a few years, then I get really into metalcore, and then I go to Warped Tour, and then I keep getting more obsessed with metalcore. I start playing guitar for a band, and then I suck, and then I quit, and then I want to be a vocalist for a band because I can actually sing, and then I quit that, and then I end up going to circus school. And I've already made a video on my past and why I decided to go to circus school. This is the 3 years that I have been documenting, and I want to share my experiences with you and my feelings and how it's affected me, how I've changed, and in a way, it's just a way for me to process things, to feel like I have changed as a person, to look back, and also to break some stereotypes, I guess, in some way, because it kind of sucks when it's like you tell a random person, oh yeah, I go to circus school, and they're like, oh, like elephants. I'm like, no. So this is a long sort of documentary thing that I've been doing, and I want to finally share that with you as I collect these videos. So let's set the stage. I'm 18, just graduated high school. I'm terrified of moving, and I'm holding on to someone that I should have let go probably years ago. I'm bent on becoming an aerialist, and I just sort of started doing the whole contemporary thing out of an act of rebellion. I didn't really know what contemporary circus was or what I was about to get myself into. I remember my first day, like really, really vividly, like the first 2 days. I think the first day I walked in and I sort of said hi to the people that I remembered from auditions, and I kind of screwed off into my own corner. You know, it was awkward. You didn't know these people, you didn't know who they were, you didn't know their backgrounds, which is kind of funny now. You know, you're really awkward around them. It's new people, you know, and I remember this day, my coach took us to the parking lot. It was hot, it was like September, it was like early September. It was just like the worst heat you could ever imagine, you know, August heat. And what we first did, the first thing we did was we ran up and down the parking lot. And then we sort of stood in a line and we'd jump. So we just kind of jumped in place like 8 times. We'd turn, we'd pass the jump on to the next people, and this was, I guess, a way of ensemble building, which is very much a big thing in that first year that I did. And that was all fine. After that, hanging out on a fabric for a while, like aerial silks, just because that was the only thing available in the gym to train. At the moment I wasn't allowed to rig, I was not doing anything, I wasn't upstairs, I was downstairs, and so I rigged. I did fabric, which is funny. So after that first few hours, we had some meetings, we talked to people, and then we had sort of an orientation. And the first thing that I hear out of the aerial coach's mouth is, you won't be having aerial class for the first 3 months that you're here. And my heart kind of sunk. I was like, crap, dude, I'm here for aerials. What am I gonna do, you know? What am I supposed to do? Eventually, I found my way. We were allowed to train, but that moment just kind of like crushed me because I just started working on like the pirouette. I just started really getting into what I was doing, and to not have it was terrifying. So before I continue talking about my experiences, I will say that the past 3 years have been, despite all of their flaws, all of the pain, all of the things that have happened, all of the bad, they have been pretty wonderful, and I wouldn't trade what I have done for anything else. I'm happy that I decided to do this. They're just, with every single good thing comes the bad. So the first real week was a shock. I can't even lie about that. So when you go to circus school, you're like, okay, yeah, I'm gonna do like conditioning. I'm gonna get strong, obviously. I'm gonna train a lot. But nothing prepared me for what I was experiencing or what I was about to experience. I remember my first sort of like conditioning class, which was kind of labeled as acro, and it was very misleading, but that aside, I literally, at the end, I was like dying. I was just so sweaty, and it was not fun, but, it's only one class, and every warm-up was the same thing. I remember, so warm-ups for some reason were always led by a coach, which I understand, but also I don't, and I've always had a qualm with this. And I remember doing this like straddle thing where you like beat your legs and then you open your legs in a straddle, and it was the most physically intense thing I had felt for so long. God, I remember it so vividly. It was weird. And I think after that, and then after my first like real conditioning, like acro class, I was like, this isn't acro, this is conditioning. And it was, they could have labeled it conditioning. I will attest to that. Eventually they did, after we go through it. So they do that, so I do that. And at this point, I'm just like, do I really want to do this? Like, I'm not getting aerials, I'm not getting this, I'm not getting that. And it was pretty tough, actually, at the beginning, because for me, I had to let go. But my expectations and what I wanted to be and who I wanted to be, I didn't really want to let go. I remember when I first started to walk into the space and doing that then versus now. I remember my first night, where I could train, like in the space. It was wild, actually, because classes were going on and I didn't really want to impede on those, and I didn't really know what I was doing, and no one really knew me. I was one of the new, students, and it was weird because rec classes happen at night, and I had to like move around those. And for some reason, I got really good at this, but for the first week, it was so strange. I remember the first day, going and switching apparatuses every like 45 minutes. I started on rope, got kicked out of rope, I went to a trapeze for a little bit, then I went to a silk, hoping that maybe I could continue training. And it was 2 hours of training every night from 6:30 to like 8:30. I would be in the space. I would train, because for me, nothing that I did ever was taught for that first trimester, and it was really frustrating. You're probably wondering what I actually learned in class. So the classes that I had that were actually circus in my first trimester were juggling, which I absolutely despised and I still can't do, and it was not a fun class for me. I think half of it was because I was just spiteful that, none of what I actually wanted to do was actually being taught. And it frustrated me. Obviously, in your first year of school, you're probably gonna generalize, and I think that's totally okay, but like, don't give false hope. I think that was the one thing, was I didn't like it, and it felt really off to me. I couldn't do anything. I was bad at balancing sticks on my face. I was bad at juggling. I couldn't do 3 balls for like forever. The second class was wire walking, which it was boring. It was boring. You just walk across the wire. Like, I was bad at it too. And it wasn't that I was like bad. It was just that there was nothing satisfying in it for me. There was no wins. There was no new skill. It was just, okay, well, you did gymnastics, now you're walking across a wire, but we're not going to really teach you any tricks. And I was like, okay, great. And then we also had to take theater, which I will talk about. We also had to take dance, which I will also talk about. And we took some academic classes, which I probably won't talk about, because they're just like, it was writing, it was just music, and we did a little bit of, no wait, that was it. Oh, we did a little bit of history. So it was really just like, yeah, so those are very simple, but I will talk about dance and theater. But yeah, so my opinions on juggling and wire will not change throughout the year. I hated it in the first trimester, I hated it in the last trimester of first year. I'm gonna get into dance now. So we took 3 dance classes. I'm going to talk just about the first trimester because something changes in the second. We take contemporary, we take ballet, and we take hip-hop dancing. And me, I had a background in ballet, I still do. So for me, ballet wasn't stressful. It was really just refiguring out where it was. But I think the interesting thing about even doing ballet when you were a kid is the fact that the alignment and the placement stays. So for me, ballet wasn't an issue. The next dance was contemporary, and we had to take a 3-hour class on Fridays, which is ridiculous. So we'd usually do like an hour-and-a-half contemporary class, and in the first trimester it was really just very basic contemporary, right? It was like, you know, your movement, and then you'd do a couple barrel turns, and it was really just very basic. And then hip-hop. So for me, hip-hop felt like the bane of my existence. I was a very closed-off person. I was very shy. I was very scared of dancing and opening up and, you know, showing myself. And for some reason, in my first trimester, I felt like I wasn't allowed to be seen. And for hip-hop, you know, I'd always get yelled at. I was, like, marking things, and I don't like hip-hop. I don't think I've ever liked hip-hop. I think because I was a dancer, like a ballet dancer as a kid, I kind of am always the opposite. I'd always make things a little too elegant. I'd always try to land. I'd always end up in like a weird fifth. And for me, hip-hop just felt like the opposite of what I wanted to do with my dance. I was like, I don't feel. And it's really interesting because I actually sometimes liked it. Other times I was so scared. I was also really bad at choreography. And then we also took the rest of the 3 hours on Fridays to do an improv thing. And for the first, I think 4 weeks, it was not fun. I didn't like dance for a while. I really didn't. I didn't like dance at all, actually. It felt weird. There was too much technique. People were yelling at me. I cried like 3 times in that class. It's a very common thing to cry in classes at schools sometimes. I don't think I found a joy for it until one Friday night. And I went into the dance studio. I was like, I'm gonna try to dance. I'm gonna try to do it for myself and only for myself. I put headphones in. I was gonna do it to metal. I wasn't gonna let anybody listen. And I had socks. I started sliding on the floor like a maniac. I whipped my head. I did all these weird things, and I was dancing, and I liked it. And then I remember going in the next day and doing it again because I liked it so much. And so by, I think, October or November, I remember I spent one night, there was a night where I spent 3 hours. I think it was like some party was going on in the sanctuary, and so I literally like hid away in the dance studio for 3 hours and just danced. And I think that was one of the craziest, weirdest things I've done. So theater was very interesting when I think of like first trimester theater class. I had high expectations for myself, and I thought it'd be very different than what it was. And I mean, I guess I should have known when it was like, yeah, you're gonna learn like physical theater instead of theater like acting, well, theater like Broadway or something like that. So I think for the first little bit, I didn't really think anything of it. I didn't really think that I was worse or whatever, you know, it was like a weird thing. But for me, one of the things that I continuously struggle with is being and speaking in front of people. And I guess that is part of being neurodivergent for me, is that it's always been a thing where I just didn't really know, or, you know, didn't really know how to connect to my emotions, because for me, connecting to my emotions was very different than, I guess, other people. I'd always experienced things a little differently, which does cause for some issues in theater class when you're told that you have to express something and you're like, well, this is how I express it. They're like, oh, it's wrong. But I've never really had a good experience in theater. I mean, it was fun. We did a lot of stuff where we'd build with each other and we'd create things with each other. The whole first year was about that, and our class ended up being absolutely hilarious. Like, there's so many funny moments and there's so many inside jokes that came from this. Theater itself was kind of a nightmare for me, but what came from theater and everything like that was actually really fun. And yeah, there were some things that I enjoyed, but a lot of it was just, I myself just wasn't really someone who attaches myself to theater. I'm more of a movement person. I can act, but like, it wasn't a fun experience for me, especially in that first trimester where I was just so uncomfortable with these people. Like, I didn't trust them yet, and I didn't really know them at all. And that really makes a difference in the next coming few years. The other notable thing that came in this school was a thing that we did every single Friday, where we'd present different forms of pieces based on theater exercises and theater prompts. And I myself was horrible at these. Like, every single week, I think there was no week that went by where I didn't get roasted by at least one coach. And I think for me, it was really weird just because I have the whole neurodivergent brain thing, and I had to always interpret these prompts in a different way, or I'd skip over something or something, and they'd be like, oh, you missed this, you did this wrong. And I was like, great, okay. But I continuously stuck to my guns. I think that's something that I've learned throughout these past 3 years, is that the more that you just stick to your guns, that you stick to your vision and what you want to do, eventually things will change and they'll realize, oh, this is who you are. It's like, yeah. And I mean, these presentations were always the bane of my existence every single week, and that's fine. I think even the best ones that I spent so long on got ripped apart, so it was a tough part. It was not fun, and I think that's okay. Nothing of this was supposed to be easy, especially when you're me and you're really bad at doing theater, or you don't really know what they're looking for, or they're vague, or you're vague. There's something. The first trimester wasn't that hard, nor was there anything really eventful that happened other than the dance thing, where I went from not wanting to dance to always wanting to dance. And I think that was the most notable change or growth, was just me becoming comfortable. Eventually, you know, the class that I was with, I started to grow more comfortable around them. I stopped feeling like I was embarrassing myself all the time, like it was high school. One of the things that I really was holding on at this time was that self, that, like, you know, old high school self, because for me, I wasn't really sure what my identity was yet, and nor did I really know who I was or what I wanted to be. I just knew that I was here surrounded by other people who are in the same caliber, same skill level, and same space as I am. We all have one goal. Eventually, I also At first, I was resistant. I was very resistant to what they were trying to make me do. I was very much like, no, I have my vision in mind, this is who I want to be. But that vision started to soften as I started to go on, and I started to accept the fact that I was conditioning and that there would be no acro class and that I had to train it, and that I accepted that maybe this wasn't a bad thing and maybe I could like it. It was just not having aerial class was the hardest thing for me because I felt like I just wasn't improving, or I wasn't changing, or I didn't really see it yet, which is funny now because I definitely changed a lot over the first trimester, and I came back to Indiana, I think later, and realized, wait, I'm not the same person that left, and I think that's a sign of growth. One notable thing that I remember from this first trimester was the fact that I could see my animals for the first time when I went home for Thanksgiving for the first time, which is a very surreal experience to come back to your hometown after leaving. I remember meditating one morning for warm-up, and we went through this thing, and I swear I like totally astral projected myself into my own bedroom, because I was meditating, I was thinking about my dog, and I started crying, and I swear my dog was right there, and it was such a weird, surreal experience, but that was the one time that I ever found meditating useful. I've never had an experience like that again, but that was so surreal, and this was like a day before leaving. And yeah, so I came home for Thanksgiving. Kind of really didn't know what I was doing. I think I tried juggling and I learned a one-up pirouette for no reason. It was so strange. And then trimester 2 starts, which is where things get way more intense. Forgot to mention 3 things throughout the first trimester. So, 1, I had 2 of my first steer wheel classes. And I realized I was doing everything all wrong, and so I had to technically relearn a lot of what I had done and learned already, but it was all for the better because I actually looked like I was properly doing steer wheel after that. And number 2, Thanksgiving break. I had my first experience in a Philly metal show. This was like the day before I left for Thanksgiving. I went to the Fillmore, and I saw Silent Planet, and it was like the night before I would go back home for Thanksgiving, and it was just really fun to experience something that people that I knew from, earlier came through, and, I know Silent Planet, and it was really interesting to go see them in a new city. Trimester 2 was a little bit better. I had finally sort of integrated myself into the school. People knew me, I had friends, I was really starting to do stuff and started to experiment with my own self. I think the rebellious sort of, I'm gonna stick with the way that I do circus side of me started to diminish, and I started to give into some of the fun new ways of doing stuff and added storytelling and things like that to my circus. The first, I think 3 weeks back, right after Thanksgiving break, were just sort of the first introduction to aerial class, which was different than what I expected it to be. I thought it was going to be more of like a technical thing, and what happened was we started to do the whole research thing where we started to experiment with apparatus, new ways of doing stuff, new sequences, beats, things like that, and I didn't like it at first. I was like, I want a pirouette. That's all I wanted was the rope pirouette. And obviously I was doing conditioning for it, but I wasn't quite ready, nor did I have the strength or technique to do it. So I had to do other things and other beats and other stuff. And I was promised we were gonna work on the pirouette by April, spring trimester, and that was fine. So I think the first thing we did was a thing called threading, and I remember that. And at this point, I was just really excited for aerial class. The acro and conditioning class, which at this point it was acro on Fridays and conditioning for the rest of the week. And this was when we started to really have a schedule for it. It was always the same thing. What we did every single day was different, but we always did the same schedule every week. These first 3 weeks, it was really intense, and I think none of us were ready for it. And that's totally valid, but it was just a lot. That's like all I can say really about it, is I don't remember much about it except for the fact that we were always somewhat in pain. Yeah. And the most notable part of these 3 weeks were my first SEER lesson that really sparked something in me it sparked a question of, am I really an aerialist, or do I want to do this whole SEER wheel thing? I think I'd done my first actual cartwheels, which for me, we'll get into why cartwheels are one of the scariest tricks for some reason for me. But the coach encouraged me in ways that I'd never seen. We worked on skills that looked good on me. We looked at skills that I could do. I did a whole bunch of skills I never thought I'd ever be able to do, and I worked on skills that I probably shouldn't have been doing. But it was just, I felt like I had a rejuvenated sort of love for SEER wheel because I started to work on new things and more things, and I think this is where things started to shift in the context of I started to question whether I really wanted to be an aerialist or not, and I absolutely love this coach so much, and it was so exciting to finally feel a sense of connection to an apparatus that wasn't aerials, to feel a sense of connection to something new. I was so excited for it. I was so excited to try new things. Last thing I did before going home for winter break was I performed my first piece at the school. And in a way, it was for me to prove myself, to say, hey, I can still do things. I'm still an aerialist. And it was to Silent Planet, to In Absence. And honestly, it's still one of my favorite pieces. Even though it's just a movement piece, it was quite beautifully done. As someone who had just entered school, I was very proud of it. This really, it solidified a love for performing, but it was really just a fun little way for me to integrate some of the weird things that I liked about myself, because at this point I was still pretty much exclusively into metalcore. So that was really fun. And then I fly home for winter break. I have 2 plans. 1, paint a pair of Silent Planet shoes. 2, do circus. And I meet up, I think it's really interesting to meet back up with your old coaches, and you see your old people, and you see the people that you used to train with, and in ways everything has changed when you come back. And that's really interesting, is to see how your old spaces have changed while you are somewhere else, while you are changing. And coming back and taking 2 weeks to do nothing but breathe. That was really important. And in this time, for some reason, I think my brain I got really into ballet for some reason in these 2 weeks, and this is really interesting for me, but also this love sort of stayed. I think it was just sort of a rediscovery of something so simple. Simple but complicated, I guess. And I mean, I started doing it in my room. I started doing little things, trying to remember what I used to know. And I mean, that was the most notable thing of the break. The other one was I started choreographing one of the deepest pieces I ever made. And I hate this piece now, and I really need to redo it. But at the time, it was like the most contemporary thing I had done. I like super started to work in a different way. My creation wasn't skill-based. It wasn't like, well, I want to add this, I want to add this. It was really like, what is the story? What am I doing? What are you doing? Who am I, you know? And I think it was character development that I didn't realize. And I guess these 2 weeks were really just painting, doing pirouettes in my room, and hanging out with my cat and my dog, mainly. The one thing that I should mention is that I rewatched, I think, Bakugan, which is really interesting, that this is very important for the next couple of months. And my brain was like, oh, what if I cosplayed a character? I didn't know how to sew at the time, so for me, I think I had to suck it up and realize that if I wanted to make this cosplay, that I had to learn how to sew. And, I ignored that for quite some time thinking maybe I'll do it over the summer. And so I ignored it. And going back to school was quite interesting because I was actually kind of excited for it. So the rest of trimester 2 was really spent on the piece that I was working on, and then also along with the piece that I was working on, it was just me training every night for 2 hours straight after, classes, and aerial class was all research. This trimester was really just about building strength and habit and routine, and my routine was just go to the classes, get through conditioning, even though you hate it and it sucks and you don't want to do it. You get through it, and then you move on to aerial. Aerial usually makes you feel happier, and then, finish your academic classes at night. We started doing a new writing class, which was much more interesting than the old writing class, because now I got to do creative writing, which is obviously a hobby of mine, as I write numerous books. One I'm hoping to get published soon. But most of this trimester was spent either in the dance studio doing like balletic movement or ballet in general, trying to figure out where I stood on that spectrum still, and then also working with the piece that I was creating in the creation of acts. Notably in this trimester, I did some cartwheels on Serial Wheel, and I improved just a little bit, but really this trimester was all working on that piece. It was weird, and I don't remember as much as I thought I did. So one of the hardest things to come to terms with in school was existing in a space where you could no longer be a person that you used to be. And for me, coming from where I was in my relationship with myself, having and existing in that space with sort of body dysmorphia and image issues, it was kind of a really weird integration. I think dance was one of the worst culprits of this. I think mainly just because I had never really had to set boundaries, because I'd always sort of had them, and suddenly it's like, well, now I stare at myself in a mirror for forever and ever and ever, and every single thought is just like, God. And I think being in such a headspace most of the time, I think first year it was because I had yet to come to terms with the fact that this wasn't something that would change and that I couldn't go back to who I was. But in a way it was mourning that loss. Also, doing Graham every Friday morning didn't help because it was cold. Oh yes, the space itself got very cold. Our first year, the school is new, so heating wasn't the luxury that it is now. Now we're very much spoiled. But at the time, my God, we'd go in very cold, and it was freezing. And I think the whole cold thing just contributed to the whole like seasonal depression thing. So I just got really, really, really sad. And the only thing that kept me going was working on this piece and pushing through and being like, okay, it's gonna get better in spring. It'll get warm soon. You have other things to do. You're gonna get through this year. Because I was really excited to major, because my thoughts now had started to shift into sort of, I think Serial Wheel will be my major, and that continues to go back and forth for the next few months. The last thing before I move on to the next trimester is the Silent Planet show that I got to do in January. So this is like, what, 2 months after the last one? Oh, I also got to see Circus Survive in December of that year, and that was such a good moment for me because at that point in my year, Circus Survive had like been my soundtrack. That was December, forgot to mention that, but I saw Silent Planet in January with Amity Affliction, Senses Fail, and I think Belmont? I don't remember the other band, but it was a really good show, and I'm really, really excited I went and saw it. This is pre-COVID, so don't yell at me, but I was sick that day. I remember that. Like, oh God, it was really bad. That was a really fun little show, and kind of like was like, yeah, here are the luxuries of Philly. Many, many, many metal shows that you have to Uber to now and are kind of expensive to get to because parking sucks. trimester 3 is the trimester that changed me the most, or I changed the most inside of this trimester. So I had now bought a sewing machine, a really crappy, like $60 sewing machine, but it was still a sewing machine, and I had plans to use it. I don't think I used it during the second trimester. I sort of like had it sit in the corner. I was kind of scared of it. I was scared to touch it. I was like, what if I do something wrong? I go home for spring break. I am currently, I think I started watching or rewatching Supernatural at this point in time. I think I was maybe 2 seasons in. No, I was like literally, I think 2 or 3 episodes in at this point. I remember that kind of vividly. I was like 2 or 3 episodes into Supernatural, and I think I'd restarted Pokemon Black 2 and White 2. Now this is where the whole ADHD thing really starts kicking in, because no longer was Circus fulfilling the purpose. I think my thesis statement says that. How to sew during circus school. That is due to the fact that this black hole was no longer being filled by circus, as circus was now my full-time thing. So I go home, I'm performing this piece that I started working on, I think the week that I get back from break. And the things that I do at home are I play around on aerial fabrics in my old studios, I work a little bit on the piece, and I watch a lot of Supernatural. I think I got through like the first 2 seasons. I forgot how scary those were, yeah. So I was like actually terrified. This comes much in play later. This is currently actually not super important. But when I get back, the first thing I do is I figure out how to, I think I figured out how to work a sewing machine. The day that I got back, I didn't know anything else about it other than, remember the first time I took the bottom bobbin out thinking I didn't need it? Turns out you need the bobbin in the machine to make a machine go. And so thus starts the adventures of trying to sew my first garment, which I did not choose an easy garment to sew. I think I chose a princess seam coat with a half modified pattern and sleeves. And if you are a sewist, you know what sleeves do to you. And then I performed the piece. So again, I've said many times that I really don't like this piece now. I think mainly just because of how I performed it. And I would love to do a redo, and I'm actually working on one at the moment. But performing a piece like this was sort of this thing where you just, I think with a piece like this one, it's really just like a screw it and go, you know? It's like you can't hesitate on doing it, because then you second guess yourself and you're like, oh, they're gonna think it's weird, they're gonna think it's stupid. And then for me, this was a weird moment where I was like, why do I care so much? And I started to question why I cared so much if my art was weird to other people, because it's like, it's my art, and like other people like different things, and I'm never gonna please everyone, so I'm just gonna do this for myself. It was at this point where I stopped really giving a crap what other people thought of me with what I was doing. I was like, if I'm gonna do weird stuff, I'm gonna do weird stuff. And it kind of blossomed a little bit, just a little bit. I'm not saying that this is suddenly where I was like, oh, the artist. No, I was still bad at theater. All my presentations were still horrible, and I still didn't know how to speak in front of people or make noises. Like, I was yelled at daily because I wouldn't talk in theater class, or I couldn't make sound. And I'm like, at this point, I'm like, it's definitely because I was neurodivergent, but at the time I thought I was neurotypical, so, you know. So now we finally get to sort of specialize for the first time, and I start with, I think I have aerials first. I start with aerial fabric, actually aerial fabric and trampoline. So I was really stoked to start specializing, and at this point, juggling had just become some freaking class I have to do every morning, where I just suffer. We had an acro class, actually, for the first time, so we actually got to do lines and tumbling, and I was like, yeah, you know. So the first thing we did when we got back was we went to the zoo, and then I had a steer wheel lesson with somebody who we were working on cartwheels again. And we were working on flags and cartwheels, and I remember this being, I think, right after this piece that I had performed. And now comes the reason why I'm terrified of cartwheels, is that I gave myself a concussion. And I mean, for the first nice week of trimester 3, I actually was doing good stuff. I was researching in aerials, I was researching in everything, and then suddenly I get a bonk on the head from a 35-pound metal wheel, and I am out. I cannot do things. I remember the next day just being like, it was bad. It was a bad concussion. And that took me out for pretty much the rest of the month. So what did I do for the rest of the month? Or whenever I couldn't train, well, I tried to finesse training, and I still went to school because I was stupid. And I started sewing. I started sewing hard. I think I had started to finish the whole thing. And so I had put together my first garment, and the first day was me really horribly sewing feathers with no way of tacking them into the garment. So I was sewing feathers, and they were falling out, and I was pulling them out, and I was like, well, it's just gotta work. And yeah. And then I think I just completely shut down, because for me, training was this thing that kept me sane, it kept me going, and I always wanted to, and I felt so bad that I couldn't do anything. But suddenly sewing was filling a void that I hadn't yet realized I needed to fill. And I started to invest myself into, convention culture once more, and as I had just 2 years prior been like, no conventions for me. I'm too contemporary for conventions, no. And then I was like, fuck, conventions are good, they're fun. And I started to get really excited for the next one. I started to really want to make more. And I think this is where the love of sewing began to spark, really. This is the first time where I realized, I think I like doing this. I was not good at it, that's for sure. But this is the first time I realized maybe I want to get better at it. And that was a really exciting, pivotal moment for me. So I don't talk about music in this very often, but music plays a huge part, because I sort of always section off my years via, what band was popular in my, playlist at the time. And I think I said Circus Survive was the first band that I remember being very, very, very exciting for me. The second band being The Sound of Animals Fighting, which I think is an Anthony Green side project, or was at some point. And then during this concussion point, I found the band Holy Fawn, which is a post-rock band. And I think for the rest of the year, they dictated whatever I was doing. Like, I loved this band so much. And they only had like an EP out. It was like that band and then Submerge, or like, I think the song Submerge from Movements. Not the album, the song Submerge was like the soundtrack to the end of this year. And random tidbit about music, I will be doing more of these little introductions of, hey, here's the music I was listening to at this point in time. Whoa, for y'all, because I know that for me, music is very important, and for a lot of people, it's very important. The concussion conveniently heals approximately a month later, which also means that I'm officially back in the business of doing circus, right when I start Serial Wheel, and right when I start aerial rope as my research projects. And this is really exciting, because this is what I actually wanted to do, and what I was deciding between. The other two were just for fun. And Serial Wheel was mainly just me doing my own thing, because there were no coaches there on the regular, and I'd always get workshops like once a month or so. And I mean, for Serial Wheel, this is actually kind of a really nice way of working, because then you can work on the skills and you come back and your coach gives you new skills to work on. With aerial, it was different. With aerial, it was like all just, I'm doing my aerial conditioning, and I want to work on roll-ups and work on beats and work on pirouettes. That's all I wanted. I didn't want anything else with rope. And so my coach was like, well, we have to do some research. I was like, fine. So we did like a little bit of research, and we also did a lot of dynamic movement. And this is where my hope for myself was like, oh, okay, maybe we're actually gonna do this. That was really exciting. And then this is right before sort of the sort of 4-day Easter break, which a lot changes in like 4 days for me. This 4-day Easter break has me finding Pokemon again. Also, I'm on season 6 of Supernatural now, so that's also a thing. And for some reason, the rest of the year, I have this weird hyperfixation on Pokemon out of all things, and that is kind of fascinating because I've only ever had that twice in my life. And this dictates my next cosplay. So I actually start designing a whole bunch of cosplays. I start getting really into like, you know, designing these things and then being like, oh, how big can I make it? Can I do wings? What can I do? And then I start really, really getting into this. And obviously, yeah, that happens. That's why the 4 days were eventful. I also did a lot of running for some reason. That was weird. Literally the only reason these 4 days were eventful is because it kickstarted this hyperfixation on Pokemon. And I remember sitting on the toilet one day after these 4 days trying to like catch Ho-Oh in an Ultra Ball or like a Pokeball for some reason. No, a Quick Ball. Yeah. I didn't. Spoiler. After those 4 days, we come back, and I think at this point we've got like a month left until we cease all classes and start working on our end of year show, which is the exciting thing every person or every class does at the end of their year. And we had a really cool prompt this week for like Friday presentations, which I was really stoked for. And I'm gonna complain about this because I'm still so salty over it. It was a really deep piece. I tried to redo the piece I did literally a month prior. I was like, well, I'm gonna try to translate it to Serial, and you know, I wasn't very good at Serial yet, so I had to like make it over there. And I worked on it for 7 days. And I think my feedback was, oh, you didn't work on this enough. And I was like, dude. And then I got roasted about 6 other times. And, you know, everyone's very vague about it. I'm just salty about it now because I did spend a lot of time on that piece. And, you know, I may redeem myself in the future, but I feel like I did a good job. Your feedback didn't mean anything to me. I didn't cry afterwards. What are you talking about? So the next thing that I do is I remake the coat that I had started because I had finally learned how to do sleeves. Still didn't know how to do princess seams or darts or anything like that, but I figured out how to do sleeves, and I was like, it's a leather coat, I have to do better. So I found some really cheap vinyl and I did the coat again. This was all in the month of April. So the month of April was really just doing rope, doing serial wheel, hating theater class, and acro class every once in a while, and doing all the stuff that I was doing, getting coaching. Mainly my goal was conventions. I was like, I want to cosplay. I want to do this. And I started thinking to myself in this time while I was training, I was like, what if I did this whole cosplay thing on Serial Wheel? And this is where the idea sparked, was at the end of this year. I was like, what if I just did like a deep piece of like Spectre? And I was like, at the time I thought I was I was like a hot crap or something like that. But you know, really I wasn't. It was just a fun little idea that I toyed with, and it really helped dictate my circus. And I was like, I think I want to do that. I started to experiment with it, and that was really exciting. Nothing really came of it though this year. So for the rest of the month of April, it was all just me teasing this whole cosplay Serial Wheel thing, but not really doing anything with it. And then we go into show creation. So for me, show creation was somewhat of a nightmare, mainly because I was so in doubt of my presentations and what I'd created. So the show itself was just a collection of presentations we had done. And obviously because all of mine kept getting roasted, I was in so few pieces that I felt so underutilized. I was like, God. And I think this is sort of a thing of the year, is that I sort of had a weird imposter syndrome of like, I don't belong here yet. And so I sort of always slinked myself to the back, not really spoke up, and then I got really sad. I'm not gonna talk too much about the show creation because it was fun. I loved the show. I loved the people who did the show with me. It was just my own decisions and my dumb self who was like, oh yeah, no, none of my presentations are good enough. And then suddenly it was like, oh, I'm in no acts other than the group acts. And I was like, oh, thanks, great. And it made me feel kind of crappy, but I sort of somehow integrated myself, and the show itself was fine. I'm not really that it wasn't bad. I just, those few weeks, the biggest thing that I noticed with show creation was not being able to train as much as I possibly could, because for me, training was like the most important thing. I was like, I need to get my 2 hours in every day. At this point, I was still doing my 2 hours every day, because for me, that was just like my meditation. That's what made me feel good, was blasting my body for 2 hours and then going home and falling asleep. Yeah, so the show happened. I think it was a one-night show. It was in the same theater we performed our graduation show in, and it was really surreal to go back there now, remembering what I had done that first year. And I, after the show, vowed to never touch a double point trapeze again. I cannot. I had to do a double point trapeze act, and I wanted to cry the entire time. But it's okay. It's fine. It was our first year show. First year shows are usually a little rough around the edges, and I had a fun time no matter what. It was still kind of fun to perform, and I liked performing. So that was a really exciting experience, even if it wasn't the most fun for me. So to close off the first year and move into the summer, the long-awaited decision of what I had chosen to major in was now officially real. And after a lot of thinking, some long conversations, and the concept of cosplay circus, I decided eventually to major in cereal, which was actually kind of surprising to a lot of people, but for me it was also the right choice, and the choice that I feel, and I still feel, was the best choice for me. Because obviously, cereal is easier to transport, it's so much better, and honestly, I had fallen in love with it. I was like, God, I love what I'm doing with this thing, and I wanted to continue. And so we go into the summer. I am now kind of really burnt out. I just did that whole year, that whole show, and I was like, I need a break, but I'm majoring in cereal, and I did take a nice little break. So the first sort of part of the summer was more so my brain needing so much time off. And so instead of, jumping right back into creation and making new stuff, I took some time to design some cosplay, do some stuff, go be a nerd. I think it was on season 10 of Supernatural when I got home from the last trimester of first year. And I watched to season 13 in about a month. I started working on Yveltal as a cosplay, which was huge. I went to my first convention back first, and then I went straight to work on new cosplay, and my brain was just literally living on Pokemon. I think I also went shiny hunting for the first time. It's kind of addicting when you do it, so it's basically just you reset your game a whole bunch to get shiny Pokemon. And for me, I think this was a justified month off. As July started to come around, as I started to exist, I had the motivation again to make new work, and that was really exciting, was to find that motivation once more. July was sort of Gen Con era. This is just sort of me going back to more. I wore more cosplay, I did another convention, and it solidified my whole cosplay circus thing. I was like, I think this has to be a thing. And then the end of the summer was pretty simple as well. I mean, the whole summer was just me making cosplay. I think I coached summer camps, and Castiel was the next cosplay, so I decided to construct the entirety of his wings, which is a lot. But for the final convention, which was the day, I was traveling the day after it ended in a plane to Philly once more, I remember competing Castiel and just having such a blast with these huge wings, and I was riding the high of that con all through that night, and I think I stayed up till like 3 in the morning. I finished season 14 of Supernatural, and I flew back to Philadelphia the next day to start the second trimester, or the second year, and in a way I wasn't ready for it because everything would change. But in a way, I was already fully and entirely ready for it because everything would change. So the first trimester of second year was orientation week itself. I think was a lot different because I came into the space and I knew what I was doing and I knew who was there, and I felt like I was at home. This place started to feel more and more like home every day that I walked in. And, you know, by the end of orientation week, I felt excited that this year was going to be cool and I was going to try some stuff and do some new things. And I think one of the hardest things was trying to balance my new love for cosplay with, you know, all my school stuff, because at this point we still had to do presentations, and I was pretty good at it, actually. I would sew whenever I could, but most of my time was spent working and training, and I designed one cosplay, and I was designing a lot of cosplay, but I designed one cosplay to be made. Nice. And it was a Shiny Garantina cosplay, because for some reason the colors of Shiny Garantina are the coolest things I've ever seen. So I got the materials on the first week back, and it was like some crappy like poppy fabric and like some jersey, and I was just like, let's try something. And so this was my after school project, was just sewing up little things on Garantina every once in a while, hoping that they worked. Maybe they didn't, maybe they did. And I also did a lot. Supernatural was huge for me at the time, right? So I was waiting for season 15, and I had said, okay, I'm gonna cosplay Dean, like fully cosplay Dean. And I found like a 3D print file for a demon blade, not a demon blade, a first blade. And I was like, okay, that'd be sick. And so at this point, the concept of a Dean Winchester cosplay Seer Will act started. But that is a story for a couple of months later. So the first week actually back, I had Seer lessons that exact day. And oh my god, so we started immediately with cartwheels, obviously, and me being me, officially now coming out of the concussion, being terrified of cartwheels. I hadn't touched them since I got the concussion, and it was like, God, absolutely terrifying. And then I was the one who was like, okay, but what if we did coin spins? And if you aren't a Seer artist or you don't know what a coin spin is, it's the one thing that everyone knows when you talk about Seer Wheel. They're like, oh yeah, can you do that thing where you go in the hands? It's like, yeah, they're talking about the coin spin. This was the coveted skill that I've been wanting for so long and had accepted that I might never get. And he's like, yeah, sure, we can work on coin spins. You're ready for it. I was like, oh, great, cool. And so he chucks me down on the floor, spots my coin spins for a while, and I try a couple on my own, and they kind of go okay. I mean, they're not great, but I'm not making it up, but I'm not sliving, and I felt like maybe this is a possibility. And so suddenly, trimester 1 of year 2 is the chase for the coveted coin spin. Before we get to the chase, I will talk about aerial so that we can feel the excitement later. Aerials now was super technical, and we were experimenting with different apparatus. I was experimenting with aerial fabric and aerial rope as my 2 apparatus, and I remember working on aerial fabric, and we were doing a lot of like dynamic things. Like obviously my whole thing was I really wanted to do dynamic fabric or, you know, aerial rope. And we worked on just a lot of technical skills, you know, roll-ups. We even started working pirouettes for reels, and I caught a few, and I had actually really solid pirouettes by the end of the trimester. But the first trimester was just, you know, experimenting with apparatus versus actually doing artistic things. All right, let's get back to the race for the coin spin. Okay, so the coin spin itself, for the first week, I was just doing it, not really understanding what I was doing wrong and falling out of it constantly, and it was a frustrating time. I think I would have like 1 to 2 to 3 hour blocks of training time, and I'd go in and I'd just do coin spins and cartwheels, trying to actually get these new skills, because these were like unlocking masses of more skills later, and I had to get them. And we worked on this gig with a director, and I think this kind of screwed me over because I was making progress towards it. And then we did this gig, and I loved the director, I loved the gig, I loved doing it, it was really fun. But I had a morning where it was really humid outside, and humidity and Seer Wheel don't mix because it gets really wet on the floor. And so I did a coin spin and I slipped straight out of it. I was like, crap. My wheel itself, my black wheel, is also, the skin was very much already roughed up at the time. So it was more slippery than others, so obviously that would happen. And suddenly I was terrified. I had a mental block on coin spins and I didn't really know what or how to get over it. And the second coach came in, I think a week later, and I was like, oh crap. Because I couldn't do them. I couldn't get myself to do them. And I felt so bad because she was yelling at me and she's like, just do it, just do it. And I was like, I don't know how or why. Whole thing with the coin spin, it was just so stressful. I needed this skill because this was going to be the next thing. And then I remember performing a piece later at the beginning of the next month, like October. So the whole month of September was me trying to get my coin spin and me failing miserably through my coin spin. And then I got a mental block on it. I said, we're just not going to touch it. Maybe if I don't touch it for a while, it'll get better. And I didn't touch it. So I performed an improv piece, I think a week later, to some Supernatural songs. So Ruby So Cute is actually my favorite Supernatural piece. And I performed a song or a dance with the cereal to it. And I improv the entire thing, actually. But I was told, they were like, hey, we need performers. I was like, I can do Cereal Wheel, but it was a juggling fest. Still did Cereal Wheel, and it worked out fine. I really liked this piece, and apparently it was really good. And I was like, okay, well, if I can make a good piece with a coin spin, then I don't need a coin spin. That was a lie. That was a joke. And the next thing that happened was I started to use this new wheel. So there's this red wheel that's a little bigger than my size for wheels, but it's sticky. And so I started to use that wheel instead. I was like, okay, well, I'm going to roll over the red wheel to claim it, and I'm going to do 10 minutes at the end of the session for coin spins. And I would do 10 minutes at the end of the session where I'd waltz 3 to 4 times. I'd try, I'd come up, I'd fail, and I'd move on. This was totally valid and totally okay. And it actually did some stuff. And so the next thing that I did was I actually completely disregarded that because I started working on a piece for the next set of performances. And I was like, okay, well, I'm going to do Dean Winchester cosplay Cereal Wheel. And I was like, I felt really bad because I couldn't put the coin spin in, but it was a really fun piece to perform and set the radar straight for, I think I want to do this for reals. And then a week later, the most exciting thing happens on Tuesday night in the gym. I remember the spot and I have the video. I caught my first coin spin on camera. My first successful coin spin on camera. If you want to look at the video, you can see exactly where I realized, holy crap, I did it. I remember training and, you know, I was feeling good. I was feeling warm and I took out the red wheel and I said, it wouldn't hurt to try. And so I tried a few and they kind of almost come up, and then I tried another and I was like, oh, that's it, that's it. And then I do one more and I was like, did I just do that? And then I did it. And after, you know, a moment of celebration, I realized, I was like, oh, yeah, this is why the satisfaction is so minimal, because now I have to do it again. Because it's not a skill unless you do it twice. So I went back to it again, and then I was being coached at the time, so I went to my coach the next day, and I was like, yo, I did the thing, I did the thing, I did the thing. And he's like, okay, now do multiples. And I was like, can't please any of you, but it was good motivation. And yeah, so the story of the coin spin was the entire first trimester was me trying to get a coin spin and disregarding almost everything else except for Supernatural. It was sick. I don't talk a lot about like life outside of, you know, sewing and circus, because obviously it's not that interesting to hear me talk about, oh yeah, and I went to get groceries on this day, and, you know, because it's like, you're a human, you know? And the one thing I will talk about is get a car if you're in Philadelphia, because I walked the entirety of my first trimester, upwards of like 2 hours to get to places because I didn't have a car and I needed to get to places. And yeah, and my parents drove me down a car for my birthday, and it was the most life-changing thing because suddenly my world was open and I could go pretty much anywhere. And along with the car came a demon blade. I call it Demon Blade. It's the first blade, a 3D printed first blade, and a Prius. And it was quite an exciting moment, actually, because it opened up so many possibilities of cosplay and stuff I could get. So Thanksgiving break part 2 was me going home and Pokemon Sword and Shield coming out, and I added wings, or added extra feathers onto my wings for Cass. I did some cosplay photo shoots, and it was just like, it was a really chill break, and that was really important. The one thing to note is that I did, right beforehand, sprain my ankle falling off of a 2-high, so I wasn't really technically allowed to do anything. They were like, just don't do anything for a week, come back and you'll be fine. I was like, great. I didn't do anything for a week, came back and I was fine. And it was very chill. But I was motivated because I think I bought the materials for Piers. Like, I was like, okay, I'm gonna cosplay Piers from Pokemon Sword and Shield because he's hot, obviously. I buy all the wigs, I buy all the materials right before I leave, and then I get back to school, and I come in slightly late. My flight is late, but the first thing I do is I go downstairs and I grab the steer wheel and I do coin spins. I was like, all right, we're training now. And that was, you know, a little break time in between coin spin session and coin spin session. So I set my goals for trimester 2. I was like, okay, we're gonna get multiple coin spins by the end of term 2. I was like, we're gonna do it. We have to do it. So I set my goal for multiple coins by the end of February, and yes, that did happen, but it happened way earlier. I think it happened like the first or second week that I was back. And so for a little bit, I'm chilling. My materials for Piers arrive, and I invest myself in that, which was really exciting. I don't want to get deep here as we do this because this is obviously supposed to be a happy documentary of just like my experiences, but this was a part of it. This little moment that happens was a part of it. I was December 6th, 2019. I was getting groceries like I usually do on Fridays, and I read a post that said a really close friend of mine had passed, and I think my heart just like dropped. I think I lost it. It was raining for a week, and I didn't really know how to react. But the way that I reacted was, I guess, a little bit different than what most people would. Obviously, I had my like cry sessions and a lot of talking to or attempting to chat with him, and a lot of very crazed messages and closing off. And then the one way that worked was crafting and making stuff. And so I invested all of my outside time into crafting stuff, and I went back into the building, and instead of just using the time that I had allotted to train, I trained all the time. I'd go back, I'd train for 2 extra hours in a day. I basically did anything to distract myself from any thoughts because it was bad. It was awful. And yeah, I'm not gonna get too much into it. So the next notable thing is Rise of Skywalker and going home for Christmas break. So Rise of Skywalker comes out right before winter break, and I'm gonna get roasted deeply hard for saying that I liked Rise of Skywalker. Yeah, I mean, I'm a Reylo stan, so literally roast me all you want in the comments. I don't care. But I remember watching this movie, and this was the exact thing that I needed at the time. You know, I was quite sad, obviously, and I was like, crap, you know, and I was going home, I was just miserable, and then I watched that movie, and I was like, wait a second, do I feel something that is joy? And I was like, yeah. And I got really stoked. I just literally because I needed that distraction. And first thing I think I do is I get gifted a new sewing machine, like a real sewing machine. No longer am I working on this like tiny little mending machine, but like I'm working on a real machine. And I buy pleather to make Kylo Ren's sort of like patchwork coat. I patterned the whole thing with a mock-up like a real sewist would do, and I make it, and I was like, whoa, I just did that. And I still use it to this day, actually. It's like a really good piece. And then the whole winter break is me just pouring my heart into cosplay, like pouring my heart into the Kylo Ren thing. I started learning how to pin tuck. I learned how to pattern. I did all these crazy things. This is 2 weeks. I make so much. And I start trimester 2, part 2, with these half-made Kylo cosplay, and to really help me feel better, I was like, maybe if I went to a convention, I'd feel better. And so I bought tickets for C2E2 in March. That's sad. I remember that, and I wanted to enter the cosplay contest with Kylo, but I didn't realize that the cosplay contest for C2E2 was, Crown Championships of cosplay. But I still sent in an application, and I got denied, and that motivated me. So cosplay-wise, for this whole trimester, I'm just sewing up a storm. Like any free moment that I got, I was sewing, because I physically couldn't think. I wasn't allowed to think, because anytime I would think, I would get sad. So I made, I think, both Screen Accurate Kylo Ren from 501st guidelines, and then I also made the Ben Solo, or the Prince Ben Solo. And then I think in February, the thought of King Thranduil crossed my mind, and you will be getting a whole video on King Thranduil, I promise. He's not quite done yet. Don't roast me. And yeah, so I spent most of that time sewing anything I possibly could. I got yelled at once for just, like, being too invested in sewing, and I was like, okay. And then I was like, hey, but, like, I'm going through grief, so, like, okay. They look guilty, and it was fine. But it was a weird time. Circus-wise, we have multiple coin spins. I'm doing great. I think in January, I get this motivation to actually do cartwheels, and for 2 months, my cartwheels are great. I'm doing cartwheels, which was really exciting for me. And yes, we will get into why cartwheels are now terrifying again. That comes with a lot of the next stuff that happens in March 2020. But for now, cartwheels are fine, and I started choreographing. I think this whole trimester was also spent choreographing a piece. I started working on this, like, Elton John Tiny Dancer piece, which became, I think, one of my favorite pieces I've ever made. I think this one just encapsulates me as a person without using metalcore, and that's really, really, really exciting. So yeah, the whole time I'm just training. This is really just a lot of training. I started working in duo ropes, which is the 2 ropes that I usually use as a fabric, and it became my invented apparatus versus having an apparatus that is, like, already used. So it's just sort of like a unique part of me. But I currently need to buy more ropes, but have no money. And yeah, so I performed the Elton John piece. I perform another Elton John piece. This whole time I'm training, extra 2 hours all the time, everywhere. I was training as much as I possibly could, because I really just didn't want to think about anything. And then I go to C2E2. C2E2 was super necessary. Like, I'm not even gonna lie to you. Going was one of the most fun, sort of, like, brain spacey things I could do, because I just needed to not think again. And obviously, I mean, I drove 9 hours back to Indiana with my cosplay in the car, and I picked up my friend. We drove 4 hours to Chicago. We parked after a long experience of parking rage, because Chicago, and then we went to the convention center, and I think for an hour and a half I spent my time in Ben Solo Prince, because I felt really embarrassed that no one wanted pictures of me. So I changed into Kylo Ren, and for the rest of the 2 days, me and my friend, we were Rey and Kylo, and he was pretty cool. But yeah, so notably, I ripped my pants twice, because I used some really cheap denim, and I didn't finish any of the seams, which, finish your seams, kids. And I watched the Crown Championships with this gigantic hole in my crotch, and I was like, God, I'm so embarrassed right now. But it was a good time. And then the next day is the most notable thing, which is my Kylo Ren serial on stage. as the masquerade, and I got second place, which was really, really dope. But that was my first time I got to perform actual circus cosplay on a stage in front of people. It was really exciting. And I go home for spring break, start sourcing fabrics with Rangel, find the really expensive fabric that I don't want to think about, and then, yeah, everything started shifting a little bit into Lord of the Rings world at this point. So I get back from C2E2, I go home for a little bit, I learn to embroider for no reason at all other than I was very, very bored without my sewing machine. And I drive back thinking, you know, third trimester was going to be pretty uneventful, I was going to go through my second year, I was going to do some cool stuff. And, you know, I think it was Tuesday, March 12th, that I went and saw Silent Planet for what was the last time pre-pandemic. And I mean, okay, great show, wonderful show, beautiful show. I absolutely couldn't ask for anything better as my last metal concert before all this happened. And then I remember it being audition week. I started working on Inside Twisting, and on that Saturday, it was like March, I don't know, 15th or something like that, or 14th. And I went out, I got some fabrics for my first Rangel project. And then it was announced that the school would be closed for the weekend. Just the weekend. Now, obviously, the weekend turned into 2 weeks pretty quickly. And I'm just gonna say it now, online circus school isn't fun. Obviously, this is like that crazy circumstance of 2020, and I kind of just shut off, you know? But it feels like that's what everyone does. They just sort of shut off, and I hyperfixated on everything that wasn't circus so I could feel something, because I couldn't do the thing that brought me the most joy. I went into costume land for the first little bit, hyperfixating for 14 hours a day of just sewing. I made my first Thranduil coat and hated it. The only time that I could feel anything was masking up and waiting in long lines to go into a Joann's with 10 people in it so I could pick up some sort of brocade or something, and it was depressing. Doing dance on the living room floor, trying to be a clown, while everything sucked and was falling apart around me. You know, everyone expected something of you, and you couldn't give anything because you had to concentrate on staying alive. I mean, it sucked. This whole period, this little like 2-month period where I was just inside this tiny square of a house, in a room that felt claustrophobic, in a space that felt like it was falling apart, doing Zoom parties with your friends at 11 p.m. on a Saturday, playing The Sims 2 to feel anything at all, reverting back to childhood interests and falling in love with The Hobbit and Lord of the Rings once again. That's the only thing that kept me going. I decided to move back home early that year. Kind of a smart move on my part. I was literally absolutely losing my mind in the house. And I mean, at home wasn't much better. You know, I wanted to go to a convention, and obviously every single convention that was promised was then also canceled or put online. And by the third online convention, I just wanted to chuck my computer. I was done. The only thing that held me was costuming, cosplay, and the concept of creating my own wardrobe. And so I did. I went, I used extra fabrics, I used fabrics I bought, I went and I did what I could to make stuff. I just made stuff, an entire Legolas cosplay. I made another Thranduil. This is where the concept of sort of costuming and circus super came into play. I created Legolas with the concept of using him on Cyrwheel. I created all these different costumes that were meant to be used on Cyrwheel, and for the first month I only did that. I sewed, I watched series of unfortunate events while sitting in my bedroom, hand felling seams to make it last longer. school, I dreaded every single Zoom class because clowning in your basement just isn't the same, and dance class in your basement just sucks. Being told to do Martha Graham sitting on the floor and cold floor next to a drum kit just isn't fun. Nothing about this time was fun. I mean, even serialing at the YMCA gym felt like such a downgrade to the absolute gorgeous space that I was in just 2 months prior, and it felt like it was hopeless. And eventually, much to my own dismay and hatred at this point, I got a retail job to feel something. And, you know, other than being able to source the absolutely gorgeous Thranduil fabrics that I got to source, it did nothing. I was just more miserable and overworked and annoyed, and the only thing, I was just waiting to go back to school. The only thing holding me together was the concept of crafting my own wardrobe and sewing. And after the birth of the viral Legolas video and a little bit of fun and troubles, I go back for my third trimester, or third year. I go back for my third and final year at school. Year 3, where you craft your graduation act. You spend a year making this thing, and you do the thing where you graduate like some heathen. You know, this year wasn't supposed to come. I wasn't ready. I was never ready or prepared, and I still don't feel ready or prepared, and I'm here now. But I did what I could do, especially in the times. And coming back to school, I thought I would feel some form of normalcy, some form of sameness, but everything had changed. Suddenly, we were doing all the fun things that we had to do, clean things. We couldn't train in the space later in the evenings. Everything felt so strange and foreign. Didn't really feel real. But I had a space to train. I had a nice wheel that wouldn't slip out from under me every time I tried to do anything crazy. I had people who I actually liked being around. I could see people and meet some new people, and I could sew. I even found a once-a-week retail job at a local shop instead of, you know, a corporation like. And the first month, the first week, I find the most defining musical artist that I'd ever found. And I mean, you know how much I love this band, Sleep Token. And these guys really dictated this, like, feeling of this year, this somber, yet dramatic and exciting moment for me and who I was as a person. I go in really excited to actually make something that felt authentic to me. You know, I'd never really been able to do that. It always sort of felt like I was trying to be too contemporary, or I was trying to fit a mold. And suddenly I was asked what I wanted to do. Now, making an act that you're going to graduate with, you have to really consider all the things. And at the beginning of the year, I was bent on making a very elven, very fantastical character piece. And I was like, I'm going to make something huge, you know, it's going to be cool, it's going to be epic. And I presented my first piece or little short sequence, and I didn't feel anything afterwards. The whole feedback was just, are you okay? And I was like, no, I didn't feel anything. And so I had to consider. I made a second one, very elven as well, and it didn't really feel like me either. I mean, obviously there is one single move that made it into the final piece. Kind of insane, actually, now that I think about it. But at this point, my thing was, I was confused. I would, you know, spin as Legolas on the weekends to make content. I would start attempting to do YouTube videos. I would do a lot of things. And this whole first trimester felt so surreal, especially with the looming second lockdown that was coming, and we all knew it was coming. So we just kind of trained and trained. This was all about training and trying to avoid anything at all. The one actual notable thing about this was my attempts to wear elven dress outside. I remember voting dressed as, I voted in my gray silver robe with the velvet sleeves, and I would go to work in these tunics. I would wear these things out. It was sort of a weird way for me to show my authentic self without having to go to anything crazy, because obviously nothing was happening. I was under the assumption that things might be happening, but nothing was. My sewing machine also, my first one, decided to be a little funky for a little bit. And so I bought my second sewing machine. Well, my second normal sewing machine. I had a serger that I bought for a little bit prior. And I think right after I bought that, we had about a month left. I was told to present a piece using music that felt like me, but it couldn't have words. God forbid it had words. No words. Words are bad. People will interpret your piece using the words. That is such a horrid thing. And then I was told to do that, to present something that's you. And for me, obviously, for the past couple of months, I had sort of detested the metalcore sort of alternative side of myself for something that made me feel a little more like I was at home. And I tried to rediscover it. Sleep Token was obviously helping so much, and I can only describe this entire sort of trimester with the song Nazareth. That's what it felt like. It was weird, it was orange, hazy. I was always tired, you know, I worked, I only shopped at Aldi, you know, all this fun stuff. And then there was a looming lockdown. And with the lockdown, I was just like, I'm gonna go home. We are now in November. I am going home thinking, you know, I'll just train for a little bit. I get some classes, you know, online classes with the coach. And the biggest thing and most notable thing is I started wearing more and more Elven fashion. I started putting it out on the internet. I started really pushing that part inside of myself. I made outfits. I made so many things. And the entire trimester, or the entire sort of winter break, was just sewing and more sewing and really trying to break my comfort zone and what I was wanting to wear and how I'd wear it and how I'd wear it out. By the end, I was so much more comfortable with just being myself. My interest started to shift, you know, from like Lord of the Rings and Elven fashion back into Star Wars, which is my usual December, January hyperfixation, if you haven't noticed a trend yet. Thus also begins the next costume, which you just saw the making of, the Senator Anakin, and I come back to school very excited. Very, very excited. Trimester 2 starts with rewatching of Clone Wars, and this is so vivid. So Trimester 2 is very interesting. First thing I do is I get really into Clone Wars, like super into Clone Wars, because obviously I have to do a little bit of research, a lot of research, and I'm waiting for my fabrics to arrive for Anakin. And the first week is like kind of a weird hybrid virtual online and also in real life thing. And I had this like rejuvenated motivation to work. I had started a sequence over winter break. I had started to add to that sequence, and my act is born at this point in time. This is a really interesting moment in time because I have a 2-minute video of this piece, and you will notice that this piece has the arc of my act, but this is the beginning. And I start with 2 songs. I start with sort of like a soft piano song that my coach chooses, and then I go into a song that I chose, and I was told that none of them worked. And I was very surprised. I was like, wait, I thought I had chosen the song, and I was told no. So that next week, I started to look into music a little bit more. I started to get back into that. And that was crazy. It was weird. It was like looking back at a time capsule of my life that I had forgotten about because everything had felt like it was falling apart, and suddenly it wasn't. And so I did. Now, this is January. I'm currently extremely motivated. I'm going and working on the weekends, and I find myself doing all these crazy things. I'm sewing whenever I can. I'm also writing and editing a book. I'm doing everything that I possibly can. And I guess in a way it was for me to not feel anything still, because, hey, it's me. I like to distract myself from the ever-raging void thoughts that I have. Notably, I finished King Thranduil's Crown. I finished some of Anakin. I have a piece that is now about 3-4 minutes long, and it is now set to The Night Does Not Belong to God by Sleep Token, and this is notable. First off, Sleep Token. Second off, it has words. I thought that was a horror, but no, it works. And I get really excited, you know, things are I'm not scared, because things actually feel like they're coming together at this point in time. My piece was like 4 minutes long. It had all the skills. I got my one-legged coins in there. I got, you know, all of my fun little full turny things, which, if you don't know, I really like full turns, and apparently it's a skill that people really enjoy as well, and is quite difficult. So I felt like, well, I must put that in. It has a meaning to me. It doesn't really mean anything to anyone else, because I never really explained the meaning. Because it doesn't really have a meaning. You can put whatever meaning you want on it. And things were really starting to look up by the end of January. Things were actually quite nice by the end of January. I'm quite fond of this moment in time, because everything was just going. I was training all the time. I felt like I was doing a lot. I was really excited. And then came the big snowstorm of January and the beginning of February of 2021. It snowed like 6 inches. This is crazy. Like, this has never happened before in Philly. We had a snow day. I hadn't had that happen at all since the time I had started. And suddenly it was like, you couldn't, like, my car was buried. You couldn't see anything. The parking lot was buried. Everything was weird. And the snow day kind of threw everything off, because suddenly I was like, I don't know what I'm doing. What am I supposed to be doing? And, you know, we had our first online class in like forever, and it was like stupid, and I hate it. I still hate them. Online classes, online circus classes are bad. And, you know, we go back like the next day. It was a very strange day. I had a friend, or someone was playing Scary Kids Scaring Things, or either Scary Kids Scaring Things, or We Butter the Bread with Butter on the speaker. And, you know, at this point I'm still kind of in Star Wars land, but I was like, dude, like, I could get back into this. Like, it was really, it was nostalgic to hear I Wrestled a Bear once, and like all these bands, and I was like, wait a second, maybe I'm still emo. Which, you know, fun realization in the early mornings of acro classes. Right, we had acro classes for the first time in my 3 years. I had an acro class, dude, and I actually got to do some new fun things. And so the acro class is one of my favorite things every week, and I still love tumbling with people, because it's just such an environment of just, oh, what if you can do this? Oh, what if you can do that? Oh my god, what I'm just gonna be dumb, I'm gonna do this. Like, people who do acro, like circus artists who do acro, are dumb, but they're dumb in a good way. They'll just try a bunch of crazy shit, and they know that they're gonna land it, so they're fine. And so yeah, we're doing that, we're mini tramping, and, you know, the snow starts melting, and we're back into a good groove. I'm working with the song. I have an ending now. We're about 4 minutes here, or 5 minutes is the song. And it snows again, first off. So it snows again. We get another snow day. Snow's buried again. I go outside. It's crazy. And then I get told that my song isn't strong enough. It served its purpose, but I need a new song. I have a piece. The piece, I don't think, changed very much after this point. It was pretty set. And I was like, crap, I need a new song. And so this is like middle of February. And I hear Jaws from Sleep Token for the first time, and I'm like, this could very well be it. It followed the arc. It had a very interesting concept, and it wasn't anything too crazy. And I was like, this might be it. And watching the evolution of this piece, going from the first song to Jaws, was like, that's it. That's the song. And this is a weird, like, nerdy thing of, like, you know when you did it, you chose the thing, you know what's right, and it's like a really beautiful feeling in your gut, and you're like, oh my god. So throughout the second trimester, I perform a piece in the beginning of January, which is a reprise of Elton John. So I do Goodbye Yellow Brick Road, and it's a really cute short piece. Obviously my wheel kind of smacks down in the middle, but like, I love it. And this is a really exciting moment just to get back into performing. Notably, I also worked my job, and during this time, I started accumulating something, which is a series of songs that I started to create into a playlist of things that relate to the book that I'm writing, and suddenly they became more than that. They became a concept of short films. And I have not yet said anything about this, but I have started to work on a series of short films based on some really deep stuff that I don't really discuss, but that's okay because I discuss them in movement. And maybe you'll see that, maybe that'll be something for the future. But every single weekend, I would choreograph in my head, create things. I was ready to be an artist. I went from the person who was like, oh, contemporary circus, it's too much, to being like, oh yeah, this is good shit. This is good. And it's so fun to do that stuff just because of how, you know, weird contemporary circus is. It's also really fun because no one gets it, and then you're just like, but what if they interpret it this way? And what if I do this? And then it clicked. I started to get circus and contemporary circus and what I was doing and why I was doing it and everything about it. I wanted to make someone feel something. I wanted to make someone cry. I was like, I want to make you feel this thing. Doesn't matter if you interpret it in a weird way or if you interpret it in my way. I just want you to feel something. And I want to tell my story, and I want to tell stories with myself, using my body, using movement, because sometimes stories can't be told in words. And by the end of trimester 2, I got it. I'm now obsessed with Sleep Token. I am going home for a week. I'm currently so motivated to create work. I'm starting to work on another piece to perform alongside my thesis piece, which now the costume discussion had started. Things were looking up. And I was so excited to share my work with people. That week was a very interesting week. I started just by listening to a lot of Sleep Token, obviously, like I was really obsessed with Calcutta, and suddenly I fell into this black hole abyss of finding all my old emo bands again. I started from square one. If you don't know, I had my first emo phase when I was in middle school. I started out with Black Veil Brides, I moved into Pierce the Veil, Sleeping with Sirens, and I for some reason sped run it. I sped run the day. I spent a day on Black Veil Brides and Pierce the Veil and Sleeping with Sirens, and then I moved into some other stuff, which was slightly heavier, you know, like Bless the Fall, stuff like that. I started to revisit all of my old stuff, and I really started to get into like movement and dance to it. Like, it was very interesting movement, you know, think contemporary dance, but weirder. And while I was doing this, I was also obviously choreographing Bloodsport, and I started to choreograph these short film things, and these dances, and everything made sense. I just love to create stuff. And I love circus. That's like, it is so stupid to say, because it's like, well, duh, you love circus. You spend 3 years torturing yourself to get a degree. But at this point, it had really started to click how much this actually meant to me. I was no longer just a student. I was no longer someone forced to take a dance class. I wanted to take that dance class. I even wanted to take theater. As weird as it sounds, I even wanted to take a theater class. I was like, yes, tell me that I am a horrible human being because I can't make myself cry on stage. I wanted to really take it in, because at this point it was like the realization was hitting that this was the end of this moment in my time. I'm moving on, and of course not immediately. I still have yet to figure out exactly where I want to go and what I want to do, but so I bring my guitar with me for the last trimester of school, which is just a really fun random fact, but sometimes I still play my guitar. And I bring my guitar, I come back, I'm starting to work with Jaws, and my costume, I said I would go that weekend, I'd go to the Fabric District, and I'd figure out exactly what I want. The concept was now less elven and more abstract, of just flowers. In a way, I've always used flowers as a form of blossoming and becoming, and really showing yourself. Like flowers, when they bloom, they're like, oh, this is you. And I know that's very generic, but it's kind of what I did, and that was my thought process. I was like, well, this is really just a piece where I'm just showing my true self. I'm unmasking. I'm no longer scared of being neurodivergent and being myself and showing every single part of myself. No longer was I scared of showing the bad aspects of who I was. The scary ones, the ones that you don't really like telling people. I wanted to show all of it. And thus the flower idea was born. And so that weekend, after a long day at work and wearing my demonias like a dumb person and getting blisters on my feet, I Ubered over into Center City because Center City is scary, went to the Fabric District and picked out this absolutely gorgeous orange, pink, or fuchsia silk. And this was the base for my costume. I bought appliques. You know this video. This video is on my channel. The making process was a long thing, but I made my entire costume, and I'm so proud of that. So the next week, suddenly things start to shift a little bit. So I start to find even more old music, and no longer do I just care for Star Wars or anything. Star Wars runs in the background of all times and all aspects of my life. I love Star Wars. First I found, I think, Attack Attack. For some reason I was like, yeah, we're gonna listen to The Wretched by Attack Attack first, before anything else. But okay, The Wretched from Attack Attack slaps. It changed my entire sort of brain. I was like, yo, this stuff is cool. And so I go and dig into more metalcore, and then I find more modern metalcore, and I'm starting to get back into that world. And this is happening at the perfect time. I'm about to perform Bloodsport in the next week, and I find this motivation to just share my love for this stuff. And I remember performing that piece and just smiling while performing it. I'd never felt that before. I was always so concentrated, but suddenly I was like, whoa, I feel something, you know, I feel this amazing emotion of just joy, of overwhelming joy in showing you my work and what I love to do. I'm no longer embarrassed. I mean, it continued. I started to listen to even more new stuff. I started listening to even more music. I went into the depths of new bands I'd totally missed out because, you know, the past 2 years I've spent in circus and elf and nerd and cosplay world. You know, I checked out like Darko. I checked out all these crazy, I think, Imminence, you know, Landmarks. I don't know if that's how you pronounce it. A lot of these like new metalcore bands from the now, like modern stuff, you know, my taste kind of stopped. I stopped really caring about new stuff, new metal in, not new metal, new metalcore in like 2017. So, you know, my stuff kind of stopped with Knocked Loose and stuff like that. And so I felt like I was joining a new world with like old memories, you know, 2015, the peak. I guess this couldn't have come at a better time. April 1st, I remember walking into school and there was this tiny door in the student lounge. And then you walk in, everyone's going crazy. I didn't even think about it, but like everyone's going crazy. And you walk in and suddenly it's covered in balloons. And I had never been pranked so hard. And it was the weirdest yet most fun thing I'd ever experienced. And when you give circus artists balloons, especially balloons shaped like dicks, things happen. So I go to class like normal, and about 15 minutes in class, we get the word from someone. They're like, hey, they're playing volleyball in the sanctuary. And I was like, oh, we're starting this. Yes, they were. They were using a rigging line for the net, and they were using balloons. And then we just played for like hours. I swear, it was like the most fun I'd ever had. And if you're thinking what circus artists do for fun, they play volleyball really poorly. There's a reason we're all circus artists and not professional athletes in a different way. We're professional athletes in the sense that we are athletic and we do the things we do, but we're artists. We don't do games. And we played volleyball, and then eventually it turned into volleyball with like the big yoga balls, which this is very common, and it was just the most fun thing. It was very necessary for all of us. We were all very, very, very stressed. So doing this and just having a moment where you can breathe and exist was so much fun. I get my last in-person coaching session. My piece is coming together. I think I was the first one done. My costume was ready. I ran my piece for the first time in costume. And then the school has to close for 2 weeks. We held out until April on our first COVID case. And we were stuck online, and then we had a week, and then I had to perform this piece. And I was so scared. I was like, I can't. And so I guess the only thing that really held me together at this point was, I think, Beartooth, actually. I think I rediscovered Disgusting, and then I discovered the entire discography that I'd missed because I was living in 2012. So we come back to school. This first week is weird. We have another modified schedule. We're online, we're in person for a little bit. I perform my piece like 16,000 times just to make sure that I have everything right. I train so hard because I had never felt more excited to do stuff. You know, I trained once during the 2 weeks of break, like outside on a tennis court, and it went fine, but it wasn't like, you know, great training. I also had to kick some tennis lady. I'm sorry, if you're watching this. I guilt tripped a tennis lady off the court just because I was like, I need to train now because otherwise I'm not going to do well. Sorry. So we get back. The first week is literally just more training. I'm working like 3-4 hours in a day. And at this point I put in my 2 weeks and I quit my job because I needed to concentrate so hard on graduating. Otherwise I would just not graduate. I finished my pants and I have changed my boots. Everything is perfect. Like, my act works great. I finished my act. It's done. I'm so ready. And then Tech Week comes. Tech Week was a very strange and jarring experience because it totally changed the entirety of my schedule, and being a neurodivergent human being, any change in my schedule is terrifying. But it was also a good change. I trained. I did a lot of training throughout that time. And I remember my first run of my piece with the curtains up and the space all set, and it went horrible. I came out of my coin spin of all things. I couldn't even do a full turn. I stalled. Everything felt like it was wrong. And my anxiety started to run high. This was it. This was my piece. This was exactly where I had to be. But I was screwing everything up and I couldn't do it right. How was I even going to perform it? And so the next few days I stressed really hard. The next day it was very humid and I slipped on things that I should never have slipped on. I spent the entire week in these boots because I had to get used to them. I spent so much time in my costume. I remember Tech Week, day 3, there were 2 groups of people doing lights at night, and I was on the second one. And so the first one stayed up until like 1 a.m. and the next group, my group, the day after, did the same thing. And this was on Thursday night, so we were basically like there. This was thesis. And I mean, I finished at 10. I was very lucky. My lights were really nice. Thank you to the people who did them. And I ran the piece just fine. I was very hot. It was very hot and I was very warm. Probably why I ran it just fine. I come home and 2 videos have released, and I just remember this night so weirdly vividly, but like Spirit Box's Circle With Me had just released. And then on a whim, I was also like, okay, I'll check out the new Attack Attack just for fun. And so for some reason, these two songs they stick with me just because they were in such a weird time of my experience here, that it's just like, I remember Circle With Me just being like this thing that I didn't really think I'd like, but then got stuck in my head, and then suddenly I fell into the Spirit Box train like everybody else, and I mean, now they're absolutely amazing. Thank you so much. And Attack Attack, I mean, that song was just like a hype song that I needed. I was like, yeah, this chorus is cool. And then comes Thesis. Oh my God. This was it. It was torture to wait backstage. You know everyone else's piece. Every week you'd see their piece and how it progressed. You'd give them feedback, and then suddenly these are the pieces. This is what we're performing. You'd hear their music, you know exactly their choreography, and you'd wait downstairs. Somehow you had to stay warm, but you couldn't be too exhausted, but you also, for some reason, you pee when you're nervous, so you have to go pee a bunch of times, and it's a whole thing, and you're waiting until your piece. And so I waited hard, because I was like one of the last people. And I don't think I ever felt so much anxiety, but also so much calm than waiting while the person before me's music was beginning to fade. Oh my God. And then you get out, you breathe, and you perform. You kind of lose all thought. You can't really think of anything, because then suddenly you'll probably screw up a piece. And so you don't really think of anything except for just do the thing. You can do it. And I did it. 2 nights in a row. Really no mistake. I did a couple, there were small things that, discrepancies that changed, but everything was fine. And I had performed my thesis. And then we had a really fun party afterwards, but didn't have time to process this. Before I could even process thesis, I also had to start creating a show for my graduation with my classmates. And at the beginning, I was very stressed about show creation, thinking that it was going to be completely different and terrifying. But it wasn't. And the next month, I think I spent primarily beating Anakin stuff and going in for 6 to 8 hours at a time and making a show. We did a lot of improvising, we did a lot of small things. The hardest part of any show is the small details. And especially for the first week, it didn't really feel like a show. It was just sort of like a whole bunch of like small snippets of things. You're like, what is this? And, at the beginning, it felt like a very long process. 5 weeks is like, okay, that's a long time, but it went fast. I would do the 6 hours of show creation. I'd go and I'd train, and then I'd go home and I'd bead until 11. I have a lot of time blindness in this time. Kind of didn't realize it was 11 most of the time. I'd go to bed at midnight, eat oatmeal the next morning, and I'd do the same thing. This was just a very much a habitual routine thing. And so by week 4, when he started doing run-throughs of the piece, I was like, oh my God, wait, we're doing it. This is a show. And the thing that I had promised myself, I said, we're going to put a pirouette into the show. I'm going to do a pirouette. And I did. I've never been more proud. I said when I walked into circus school that I would graduate with a pirouette. And I did. I have a pirouette. I'm a rope artist. I consider myself a rope artist. I am an aerialist just as much as I am a serial artist, and in a weird way, this solidified it. So I was very stressed about the pirouette the entire time, because the first week went fine, and the second week I started falling, and then the third week I was like, oh no, it's time. And then we moved into the theater, and it was actually decently fine. Adrenaline really helps, but the first few were really bad. I burnt my wrist quite a bit, falling because I'd catch it in a weird way where I wasn't used to it yet. And then the last weekend of school felt surreal. We weren't even in the building, we were in the theater because we were performing shows. So we had finished all our dress rehearsals, and suddenly we were doing 2 shows a night, and I did it in front of an audience. I'd never felt more connected to my class. I loved doing it, and being a circus artist for real. This was a real show. We were doing a real thing. And then I had to graduate. Now, I have yet to process this fully because things keep moving so fast. But I wore elven dress. I went up, I got my diploma, I cried. We performed 2 shows that night, had a really nice party, and then said goodbye. I moved out in 3 days, and now I'm here. So now we come to the end. I sit in my childhood bedroom, and I'm standing behind a mirror recording this right now so that no one hears me. And in a way, a goodbye is a goodbye. But this is a goodbye that is very much exciting because it means that now everything is open and I'm here to be an artist and share my work to the world. And I hope that those who stuck around for this long want to see that. I may not know where I'm going right now. I may not know where I'm going for a little bit, but I have many things that I want to do. I have many things that I want to share. And I do hope that if you're interested in them, you stick around. Now, I must get sentimental because obviously the last 3 years, even though they've not been the world's most wonderful, have been some of my best years. I let myself change for the first time in so long. I stopped caring about the person that I used to be. I finally became someone that I actually am proud of. I stopped masking for the first time in my life, and I've never felt more connected to who I am. I've grown into myself. As hard as that was, as long as I thought that would never happen, letting go made me feel more like myself. And to that, I must also thank everyone around me. To my coaches for putting up with me for so long. You've put up with so much, and I'm so sorry. To my classmates, you really helped me feel more comfortable and really let me exist in a space without judgment, without fear. To Colin, I love you. To Silent Planet for existing and coming and doing shows in Philly. To the big red wheel that got me my coin spin and eventually a lot of other skills. To Elton John for making wonderful stuff. To the dance studio for picking me up whenever I felt like absolute garbage. To the time that I fell off the rope many thousands of times, and the mat being there to catch me. To the one time in second year we closed ourselves off in a bunch of grimmies and thought it was really fucking cute, and it was. To Spirit Box, to Beartooth, to all the other metalcore bands that I've finally let myself discover and rediscover. To Sleep Token for absolutely everything. To Silk for purposing my costume. To my now very interestingly named Sear Wheel, who I have not named yet, but will get a name very soon, and has put up with so much of my absolute crap. To Star Wars, to the Clone Wars, to Rise of Skywalker for pulling me out of a weird time. And yes, you can roast me for that. To Lord of the Rings, to The Hobbit, to Thranduil specifically, and Legolas. To sewing, to cosplay, to cosplaying Legolas and Sear Wheel and unexpectedly going viral, thank you so much. To the snow that graced once and then locked me in my stupid parking lot for a week. It sucked. To myself, for letting myself change and really accepting that things can get better. As miserable and as hopeless as they may seem, you are not a bad person. you can get better, and I love you. And with this, I sign off. I say farewell. I hope you stick around for my next adventures, and I hope that I find adventures very soon. To everyone that I know, to everyone who's been with me on this journey, I love you so dearly. Thank you.